Welcome to Culture Drop, your podcast for music, art, culture, and everything in between. I'm your host, Jed, joined today by co-host and musicologist William Devitt. Today we're going to be focusing on the albums of Richard Thompson with a spotlight on his early career. We're going to be covering the years 1972 to 1982, starting with Richard's first solo album, Henry the Human Fly, released in 1972. And we're going to be covering numerous releases, culminating with Shoot Out the Lights by Richard and Linda Thompson in 1982. So sit back and enjoy our discussion of the music of Richard Thompson.
Were you going to do Richard and Linda?
Yeah, I was thinking we'd try to start with Henry the Human Fly, and even though that's not with Linda, if you want to, just because that's his first album, and go through as far as we can.
Yeah. Linda sings on one or two songs.
That's right.
That's vocals on Henry the Human Fly, but it's not. That's an odd transitional record for Richard. And looking at Sufism, because that'll play a role in the dude's life, in Richard and Linda's life. And
yeah.
I'd always thought it was groovy, and I'm sure, know far much more about Islam in general than I do.
We can talk about Pour Down Like Silver and First Light, are his Sufism records, so we can touch on that a bit when we get there. But basically, in a nutshell, every religion has their mystical branch for a very small group of adepts. Like in Christianity, we have Gnosticism, right?
Sure.
Islam, there's a very advanced meditative and celebratory dance culture, which is Sufism, and it's very metaphysical, it's very deep. It's almost like a different religion, Sufism, in that it's very celebratory of music and has a real meditative and metaphysical aspect, if that makes sense.
And that's always been my impression. It turned me on to the sort of mystical aspect of Christianity, the non-denominational.
Yeah, there you go. That's a great example, where it doesn't have to be like just religious rock. It can just inform.
I'm just saying it may come up in our conversation, particularly with Pour Down Like Silver and First Light.
Yeah.
Maybe my very little knowledge of Sufism for years, decades, was inaccurate. So I was trying to do a cramming, skimming various Wikipedia pages, because there's a whole lot, many different pages, because it's about the music. But the thing is, obviously, it's a big deal. It's like saying Tai Chi wasn't important to Lou Reed in his later years or something. It's hard to ignore that Richard, and for a while, Linda, and actually Linda had some pretty bad things to say about living in the commune when they took those couple of years off.
There's a lot of Gnostic or secret societies within religions. There's like a coded language. So you're probably familiar with the poet Rumi, who I believe was Sufi, and a lot of his poems are about drinking wine, and that's code for drinking the divine. So anytime you encounter wine, that's coded language for getting in touch with the spiritual.
Okay, so it's a metaphorical thing. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a good thing to bring up, because I think it's a thread that will run through.
I think it was after the first album. I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight.
Okay.
Maybe Hokey Pokey, but certainly by the third album, Pour Down Like Silver, which is explicitly, I don't know, here we go. It's a weird thing, this guy and gal coming from this very British tradition with Fairport Convention, and he only drew more heavily on that. He became a more confident solo songwriter with his own ideas rather than the group ideas of Fairport.
I had to look it up because I thought a lot of these sounded like traditional Irish ballads or something, but supposedly he wrote all these songs.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's maybe one cover on the album, Henry the Human Fly. It's an odd album. I forget which song. There's New Orleans influence with a horn section in American style. New Orleans, specifically New Orleans horn section on one song. And my favorite song actually is It's an original, and you'd never know it, really. It just seems like something that's existed for centuries. And it's Wheelie Down is the name of it. And it's a drone.
Right.
So obviously a lot of Celtic and British Isles music has that feature very prominently.
Yeah.
And Wheelie Down is just piano. It's just, I think, Richard playing piano. And piano is an instrument that almost very rarely, through all his years and decades of music, shows up on his records.
It's interesting. I made notes on this song. I wrote, sounds like an Irish ballad, interesting drone and piano chords.
Yeah, and what's up with the piano? Where did that come from? Because Fairport almost never used a piano or any keyboard, and he almost very rarely in ensuing years used one. And it's those weird effects that start the song and end the song is Richard using a bottle, like a beer bottle, his pickups on his guitar, electric guitar. It's a strange, unnerving sound. And those are the only two instruments.
Yeah.
An acoustic piano and his strange guitar manipulation.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it's just him on vocals. And it sounds for all the world. Even his enunciation, his diction, sounds like Old English.
Right, that's right.
And it just very haunting. And lyrically, what's it on about? Who knows? And the armies of deliverance will be running to the ground, and the kestrel will roam in the sky, some falcon-like bird over Wheelie Down. Yeah, just a strange thing. And he was pretty young then. He was probably maybe 21.
Mm-hmm.
When he started with Fairport, he was all of 17.
Yeah.
Through their four albums. And so that came out in, 72?
72.
72, yeah, thanks, yeah. But yeah, a strange album, trying out all his musical loves and influences, which would show up later in his career and as he developed his songwriting and arranging craft.
Yeah, you had mentioned the New Orleans influence. I had made a note about that song Mary and Joseph that has horn section and bass drum. I had written down New Orleans, and it sounded getting a bit of a Dylan Rainy Day Woman, number 12 and 35 type of vibe on it.
Yeah, he was a huge Dylan fan, and Fairport recorded at least one Dylan song, maybe a couple, and one of them is really good, and I can't remember what it is, and I recall it actually liking it better than Bob's recorded version. I clearly hadn't decided on a set direction that he wanted to go in. But it's very distinct album musically from Fairport. You got to remember, their first album was pretty much mid-60s pop rock album with, I can't remember her name. And the second album, we're talking about Fairport here. The second album that's when Sandy came in. Mm-hmm. On the second album, What We Did on Our Holidays.
And she sings background vocal on The Angels Took My Race Course Away on this album, which I thought was Linda, but apparently that's Sandy Denny.
Yeah, I forget which one. One, maybe two that Linda. And maybe she sings alongside Sandy on that song.
Probably.
But yeah, it was over 5 albums, studio albums. It was a progression. Fairport didn't start out doing. They didn't arrive fully formed as this British Isles folk rock band. They worked their way through it. Anyway, it's interesting that Richard took a very definite detour from the last 2 Fairport albums, Elysian Leaf and Full House, which were decidedly of the British Isles folk tradition. And he a bit more, not esoteric, just different styles, different flavors. on Henry the Human Fly.
Yeah, I can see some of these are like a full-on rock band arrangement, and some are more acoustic guitar and accordion. So there's different styles, but there's a lot of things in waltz time. There's a lot of things that do feel very traditional. The producer or co-producer on this album, and then pretty much all the other albums we're going to discuss, is this guy John Wood, who worked closely with Joe Boyd and also on the Nick Drake albums. Anyway, I really like the sound of this album and the other albums that we're going to talk about. Yeah, it's just got a nice, clean but powerful sound to it. The drums and the guitars, everything.
It's a very stripped down sound, and to me, it's actually irritated me. Wood, he also did John Cale's mid-70s albums, 3 of them. Richard would his first album with Linda, the next year, 73, I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, would actually utilize Cale's rhythm section. Timmy Donald on drums and Pat Donaldson on bass. They were both signed to Island Records at the time. I'm talking about the first 3 Richard and Linda albums.
Oh.
And John Wood also produced John Cale's 3 albums.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Slow Dazzle, and Helen of Troy, and Fear in the mid-70s. And Richard used his rhythm section.
Yeah.
I think Dave Pegg and Dave Maddox from the final iteration of Fairport Convention played on a couple songs here and there over those 3 albums. The sound is very nice and appealing, but you can see live how those songs just really breathe. I've always thought that John Wood's production was just almost wooden, claustrophobic. It was so dry.
It's so dry. I think I think there's very few people who could get away with that. The reason I was okay with it with Richard is his guitar playing is so great. I don't want a lot of extra effects in there.
I agree entirely, and that's only one reason why those albums are so great and hold up so well.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, he did not do any of his free pyrotechnics on any of those albums.
Yeah.
Maybe a song here and there, and we'll get to that on the next album, 2 albums away, Hokey Pokey, which is one of the great guitar. It's an all-time classic. But generally, he was pretty restrained on those albums in the studio. Yeah. Live was a complete other story. That's where he really tore it up.
Do we know why it's called Henry the Human Fly?
I have no idea.
I don't either.
It's a wacky, the album cover is wacky. Apparently that was some member of the peerage, a lord or an earl or a duke or someone that hit the front hallway of his mansion.
Okay.
They shot the cover. I have no idea where that comes from. I read Beesling, his autobiography, and maybe he mentioned it. I just don't remember.
Yeah, okay. A little bit scary for the children, that cover.
Well, yeah, and check out those shoes.
Those shoes. What the heck?
That was a thing in, I want to say, 16th, 17th century, all over Western Europe. I think it started in Italy and Spain, Portugal. It was pointy, very long, pointy shoes, and they were considered a status symbol.
Oh, sure.
And Richard wearing a pair of them, along with a fly mask and a guitar. So, who knows what it means? He's a funny guy. Yeah.
It says Richard Thompson starring as Henry the Human Fly.
Exactly, yeah. So I want to ask you because I have a little story about how I got into Richard Thompson, and it was actually with I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. How did you get in?
I don't have a specific memory. I'm going to guess the reason I got into it is probably I was really into the Rolling Stone record guide, in the early 80s, and maybe I stumbled across all these 5-star ratings for all these records and just grew curious. And it was around the time that Shoot Out the Lights was coming out and getting good ratings, so I think that was my entry point.
So your entry point was Shoot Out the Lights, do you think?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, because mine actually was I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight.
Okay.
But that was like 1985, I think.
What was?
When I first heard the record.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I'd heard about it, the record, for years. I'd heard about Richard Thompson for years.
Yeah.
I'd heard about Fairport Convention for years. I just didn't have inclination, or I never heard a song on the radio, or oddly enough, my older brothers did not have any of his records or Fairport's records in their voluminous record collections. So I just took a chance on the record.
Yeah.
And I remember very well, I bought it.
Yeah.
I went to the Bright Lights. It really, and it's not what I expected. I didn't know what to expect. Hearing this term folk rock, I didn't know people considered Dylan folk rock, and I didn't really know the Byrds. I didn't really know, but it's British or English folk rock, and that wasn't on my radar. I didn't know I was a loud guitar rock and roll guy, and it moved me immensely. As it turns out, I didn't get another Richard Thompson album till I think the early 90s, and then I got everything. I had the money, I got everything on vinyl and cassette. Yeah. Everything that he had released up until, I think, 91 or something. But this album moved me immensely. I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. And to this day, it's a desert island album.
Well, that's actually a very interesting insight, because I view I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight and Hokey Pokey as very much the dynamics of relationships albums, and his lyrics and the way he sings it and then the way he expresses it with his guitar playing really brings that to life in very poignant ways, I think.
Oh, definitely. And sonically, they sound like, if you put those two albums, the third album as well, on shuffle, on a CD player,
yeah,
it would sound like one big album.
Sure.
The same band, the same producer, the same engineers, the same studio.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hokey Pokey, that would, I wouldn't hear that for another 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
But that's not quite as stark as I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, which thematically is, I don't know if it was planned that way, or conceptually. It is very stark. You have the title song, which is a moment of grace, and has that great sort of British or English marching band, brass band on it, which gives it this false sense of gaiety.
Which album are you talking about now?
The title song, I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Which Linda sings.
Yeah.
And even that is just plain, it's a bright spot in working class drudgery.
Yeah, I view these first 4 songs 10 out of 10, like great songs. When I Get to the Border, Calvary Cross, Withered and Died, and I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. And my introduction to Withered and Died was an Elvis Costello acoustic B-side to Pills and Soap. Was the first time I heard Withered and Died.
Really? I didn't know you covered that.
Yeah.
Did he use a brass band on it, or a
No, he just used an acoustic guitar, I think.
Oh, it's just a solo thing.
Yeah.
Okay. I would definitely agree with you on those first 4 songs and the actual running order of them. But then the next song is, to me, one of the greatest Richard Thompson songs ever. It's just, to me, it's just Down by the Drunkard's Bill.
Yeah, that's right. That is a great song. You're right.
And what's up, and you get, the electric piano, the Wurlitzer electric piano, and just some very light acoustic commentary over it. But that song to me is just, it still gets me every time. It's not really a song about alcoholism. It's about life. And specifically a certain working class experience with alcohol. But that was my impression of that era in the United Kingdom, 70s, up until, they're still going through it 4 or 5 years later when the so-called punk movement started.
Right.
Birmingham and Coventry still had huge areas of land that hadn't been rebuilt on or even renovated. This record has that feel to it, but it's not loud electric guitars and fast rhythms. It's not the Clash. It's not the Pistols. It's something closer to home musically, as far as where the songs stylistically are coming from musically.
Yeah, I'd made a note, End of the Rainbow had like a rockin' beat, but it was bleak.
Yeah, no, not End of the Rainbow. It is bleak. I think you might be thinking of The Little Beggar Girl, which has a sprightly, jaunty rhythm.
That's so funny. I wrote jaunty in my notes.
Yeah, well, there you go, dude.
Yeah.
Little Beggar Girl has, Linda sings that, and that's upbeat and jaunty. The End of the Rainbow, Richard sings that, and that's pretty about as down-pressing, as they say in Kingston 11, Jamaica. Down-pressing, man, as opposed to the opposite. Yeah, it's a pretty grim song. But it's funny, too. It's a funny record.
That's right.
One of my favorite songs on the record is first song on side 2, We Sing Hallelujah.
Yeah.
And it's got the very distinctly English, almost military brass band on it. It's got a crumb horn, whatever that is, I think an old English horn. And musically, it's very jolly sounding. That's it. You don't really need to say a lot more. That's
again, it's like
verses.
Tailor-made for closing time in the pub, right? For sing-along.
Oh, yeah, but it's not, let's see, the jolly, the false, not necessarily false, but the somewhat illusory optimism or stick-to-itiveness of a lot of, say, Irish folk music. This is an original song. This is not,
right.
A cover song. But it's just, oh my God, this is 3 or 4 verses. That's the life or an entire generation summed up.
Yeah.
And it has, of course, We Sing Hallelujah. It has the religious overtones of the state church, the Church of England. And musically, it's very jolly. It's a slow mid-tempo, but it's jaunty. Richard has never been a funky man. In his entire career, there's never anything that's really going to be funky.
Except on Sunny Vista.
Certainly not at that point. So it's a different kind of groove that you have to adapt to. That's the way the folk musics of the British Isles tend to be. They're not funky in the African sense or African American sense. Has He Got a Friend? There's another Linda one. Boy, what a heartbreaking song.
Yeah.
Has He Got a Friend for Me? The title tells you what the song is about. There's no metaphor or anything. It's literally just that.
It's a slow waltz, a desperate woman. It's very sparse.
Yeah, and there's no tricky poetic language in the lyrics.
Right.
Certainly not in Linda's delivery. No histrionics or anything like that. Just a woman singing a song.
Yeah.
A plea. Hey, does he have a friend for me? How about it?
Yeah, very straightforward. How about the great Valerio? It's about a tightrope walker. He's talking about acrobats of love. And it reminded me of what would come in Wall of Death, like that's like someone, walking on the edge of something.
Right. Not only walking on the edge to the danger and uncertainty of life, of romance, but life in general, experience in general.
Yes. In Valerio, it just sounds like the name of someone who'd be a famous tightrope walker, right?
Oh, yeah. Someone you just know by one name.
Exactly.
Magical, mythical person. And that does very much look forward to Wall of Death. And the metaphor, that is a metaphorical song, very metaphorical, as opposed to some of the other ones we've mentioned. And that would be a reoccurring theme with Richard later on in his career, is the carnival or the fair, the circus of life, or life as a carnival or fair or circus, as a metaphor for the mystery, the potential for danger, potential for mishap, the taking of chances that are part of life.
Yeah, good point. The other thing I just don't want to overlook is the outro to this song, Great Valerio, but throughout this album and the previous album and all these albums, his guitar playing is just so precise and beautiful and unique, and no one else plays like this.
It's almost not there. It's just acoustic. This theme, the drone is there, ding, ding, and then you just plucks out a couple notes here and there, which are just perfect. Like every note, not every chord, every single note counts, means something.
Right.
The guy's just weird like that in his ability to understand music or feel it. I think both, feel it and understand it, because the guy's nothing but a consummate musician. So he said, I'm not a musician, I'm a magician. I forget if he said musician or musician, but he's got this way of blending the two words. It's just a beautiful thing. It's like he's talking about the alchemy of music and magic and how it becomes one thing. Yeah, that's the end of that record, or that the end of the record, but the end of that song, the Great Valerio. Yeah, that is. It's just barely there. There's just nothing else going on. It's like a clock ticking. Yeah, quite beautiful. I'd be remiss if we already mentioned the third song, Withered and Died.
Yeah.
And that's somewhat halfway between the non-metaphorical and the poetical. That's one of the most devastating songs. Linda sings that. Richard obviously, wrote all these songs.
I talk about bleak, right?
And yeah, it's, I don't know, an anthem for all the goth kids we knew back in the early 80s listening to their fine music, The Cure or Bauhaus or whatever. I never really got into those bands. What, you want to hear bleak, kids?
This cruel country has driven me down, teased me, and lied.
It's everything. It's got self-pity in it, which usually is not an attractive trait for such a confessional. I don't know. I don't really know. But yeah, it's just, and again, vocals. She very much unlike Sandy Denny, who had the high, I don't know if they call it mezzo-soprano, very pure and very high soprano voice.
Yeah.
And I much prefer Linda's voice. It's not just the register. Her general register was lower.
Yeah, it's more of a timeless voice. Doesn't, like those higher voices, like Sandy Denny. I think we talked about Joan Baez before. It sounds more of that era, whereas Linda could be singing from any era.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or I guess it would be still Rome then. There was no such country as Italy back in the 11th century. Perhaps, so there's a timelessness, I assume, there as well.
Right.
But it seems somehow confined. And with the music that she was singing with Fairport, and, Now, I've heard a couple of her early solo albums, and like her first one is wonderful. And Richard plays on the same production team, John Wood producing, and mostly the same musicians. It's just Sandy instead of Richard or Dave Swarbrick singing on it. So, not to take anything away from Sandy or that sort of style of singing, I guess Linda sounds a little more contemporary to me.
Yeah, I agree.
She, not so much the girl on the street, but just somehow it seems more personally felt. And she's generally singing songs written by other people, by Richard primarily, her then husband. But it seems somehow not more relatable. That's not what I mean to say. It seems that Sandy, it was almost like not showing off, but it was almost a presentation of here is a masterful singer singing generally masterful words with generally masterful musicians. And somehow with Linda's voice and delivery seemed more honest, but I'm not really sure what you want to move on to the next one, or you got more to say about this record?
It seems like having this be a Richard and Linda Thompson record, a song like Withered and Died and these other songs she's singing, it never feels false, and she's just the perfect voice to deliver these type of songs.
Yeah. One thing, I guess I don't know how I overlooked it, because maybe, for my money, the greatest Richard Thompson song ever. But it's only about less than 3 minutes long here. And generally, when he performed it live, it would be 8 minutes long, the complete guitar freak out. So that would be the second song, Calvary Cross.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's one of those live, he really blows it up with the solos and so forth.
It's on the record here. There's some things, the intro, the little guitar filigree with the tambourine shaking against it.
Yeah.
Almost sounds Middle Eastern, which he would certainly adapt various cultural and even religious views in very shortly, that's coming years. There's no guitar freak out. There's one tremolo rhythm guitar. It's just a couple of chords. To me, it's a far superior song, even though it's a similar arrangement to Shoot Out the Lights, which would come 9 years later. But it's just that. And I think left-hand piano chords mimicking the guitar chords and bass chords on the downbeat, very unfunky. The backing vocals, Linda and Richard doing the backing vocals. He never had anybody doing backing vocals when he did it live through the years. To me, it's one of those studio miracles, and it was one of the greatest lyrics by anybody. You can take the lyric any number of ways. I think a lot of people, the popular consensus is it's a song of a love song, a song of dedication, a song of veneration to his muse, his musical or artistic muse. I think this song, and lyrically, is so much more than those things. And those things are pretty big deals in and of themselves.
Yeah.
But the lyric to Calvary Cross and how it's put across in simplicity on this record is maybe the man's finest moment ever. And this is a guy who went through a lot of changes, a lot of musician changes, became, I think, a much better lyricist and songwriter in general through the years. And usually it's the other way around. People, they seem somehow better, more potent when they're younger. And it seemed to me that the guy, Richard, became more adept as a lyricist. But this song remains. It's beyond mysterious. It's beyond soulful. It's haunting, to say the least. It's the definition of a haunting pop song.
Yeah, it's got a really cool recurring type of chord sequence, almost hypnotic groove to it. And then on the CD with bonus tracks, that's where there's a nearly 10-minute extended live version.
Yeah, and that's what people expected, later, with Shoot Out the Lights. from that song. And it's wonderful. I've never heard anything that's been less than a version of Calvary Cross that's been anything less than astonishing. But that original version, all 3 minutes of it or whatever, it just says everything. It's not a song for all times, for all seasons. It's not a song you want to listen to it in certain moods. But that's true poetry, lyrically. His delivery just stayed unaffected, not reaching for any notes. Richard became a better singer as he grew older. Yeah. But the backing vocals as well. It was Linda and he doing the backing vocals on that.
I just realized that because sometimes I confuse. I want to see the Bright Lights Tonight of, I think this is 1974 came out with Shoot Out the Lights, which came out in 1982. They both have light in the title. And then there's another album, First Light. So light is definitely a recurring theme in his music and his album titles.
But well, this album and Shoot Out the Lights will bookend his career with Linda. First Light it has its place, but it's been pretty much disowned by Richard.
Yeah, here it's Shoot Out the Lights.
Yeah, that would be the dissolution of their marriage. And apparently the song was written, and apparently the entire album was written before it was actually, the divorce was finalized, and before actually Linda knew that Richard was cheating on her. And she was very pregnant with their son, Teddy. Well, that's a couple albums, a couple years away. But on to happier things. How about that Hokey Pokey album? But Hokey Pokey came out in 70, was released in 75.
It was recorded September, October of 74, and it was released in 1975.
Yeah, okay. The title song, the first song on the album, is one of the most joyous songs I can think of. I think it's the best song on the record. It's a personal favorite. It's very unusual in, I think, Richard Thompson's canon, or oeuvre, under the guise of metaphor for ice cream.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a wonderful, a hysterical lyric, but very honest and very true, going through a couple different life scenarios. It's just a wonderful lyric, and of course, little bitty typing, which I can't read, but it's well worth just lyrically. It's just wonderful phraseology.
Yeah.
Song could have been written 5 minutes ago.
Sure.
But that last verse is obviously a nod to the sort of glam movement at the time.
Yeah.
In Britain. It's a very egalitarian line, a little couplet there. Very non-judgmental, almost supportive of the fellas in the alley who look like girls. It's like the whole trip with the New York Dolls. Uh-huh. The girls loved it. The New York Dolls were all, completely straight hetero guys. I think it's a wonderful couplet, the whole song lyrically. But for a guy who's just embracing the mystical aspect of Islam, what a wonderful and egalitarian and inclusive sentiment to remark on. And the music, of course, is typically very jaunty, very blocky. It's not quite the Stones. It's not funky like the Stones. But Richard's guitar breaks after every verse are really heavy and tough, really witty. And they're not like his standard sort of Celtic influent lines and motifs that he became known for. They're more rock and roll, very gritty. I think he was using a Les Paul on it. I think by that time, Richard had the Stratocaster, the Fender Strat was his main choice.
Yeah, I think on this album, he's spreading his wings a little bit more beyond the English folk rock style.
Yeah, he's definitely delving into American music, the country aspect.
Yeah.
Certainly musically. And what they were doing live at this time, him and Linda and the band, they covered a lot of American stuff. On the reissue, Island reissue, he covered It'll Be Me. Was that Hoyt Axton, or who was that? Not Hoyt Axton.
The songwriter was Jack Clement, but he covered Wishing by Buddy Holly and I'm Turning Off the Memory by Merle Haggard.
Yeah. I think Cowboy Jack Clement was obviously one of the engineers and producers at the Sun Records. But yeah, the Dark Side of the Street, they covered that during this period too, the R&B soul number. Turning Off a Memory, is that Buddy Holly?
Merle Haggard.
That's Merle Haggard, thank you. Mole in a Hole.
That was a cover of a Michael Watterson song, who was an English writer, songwriter, and folk singer.
Yeah, the Watterson family, and they provided backing vocals on a later album, the Sunny Vista album. But it sounds musically and the chord progression very simple. It's just a very simple country gospel chord progression. It's a really funny and really devastating lyric about, presumably, about the dangers of adhering to religion, organized religions. Yeah, it's not quite as dark or as accurate, as cutting as the previous album. It's got some moments of levity. Smithy's Black Glass Eye, about a boy who he only has one eye, and everybody takes the piss out of him, and Linda's just trying to make conversation with him. Georgiana Spree, that's a fun one. Linda singing that. So yeah, there's a little more levity. It still has this sort of British working class, workaday themes to it. The Egypt Room, which is ostensibly, I think about it, a strip club with a really groovy dancer there, the Egypt Room being the name of the club. Yeah, but musically and sonically, it sounds almost identical to I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. It's the same production team, John Wood, same band, very small band.
Yeah.
The title song is really, for me, makes it worth the price of the album alone. And plus, it's got a great violin fiddle part to complement Richard's guitar parts.
And as a little sidebar, I don't think a lot of people have heard these albums because they're not available on streaming services like on Spotify. You cannot get Hokey Pokey, Pour Down Like Silver, First Light, or Sunny Vesta. So I had to find them on YouTube to listen to these.
Really?
I'm going to be ordering them on CD just so I have them as part of my collection. It always comes down to the record label and whether they took the initiative to release it out on Spotify. If a record label goes defunct or if something goes out of circulation, it could be contractual issues. A lot of things just fall through the cracks like that, unfortunately.
But these were re-released as deluxe editions with bonus tracks in 2004, these first three albums of Linda.
That's right.
And that's not that long ago. In Ireland, they released on Ireland.
And it's on Ireland, so it should be out there, but it's not.
Wow, that is weird.
Yeah.
I wonder what Richard thinks about this, if he thinks about it at all.
Yeah.
But I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight is available on Spotify?
It is. Yeah, Henry the Human Fly is not. Again, I had to find that on YouTube.
Yeah, that's not available anywhere. That's not even available on CD except for Japan. That's where I ordered my CD copy from. Otherwise, the first time I had it was on cassette, and that's in 1991 or something when I bought it.
Yeah. So the only ones you can find on Spotify of this early stuff are I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight and Shoot Out the Lights.
I'm sure Richard himself is just bemused by it all. He's probably been bemused by the record industry in general since he was a young man.
Now, I will add that there is an album called, a compilation called The Best of Richard and Linda Thompson, The Island Record Years, that is available on Spotify. So that does have an overview of these songs, but it doesn't have everything.
Yeah, I think I had a copy of that when it came out in, 2001 one or something like that. I can't remember if that had any songs from, say, Sunny Vista or First Light.
No, almost all of them are songs we've already discussed. I'm ready to move on to Pour Down Like Silver if you are.
Yeah.
Which also came out in 1975.
Yeah, boy, they were prolific, and I guess that would make up for lost time because after that album, they toured behind it. It's a small band, and there's a great album, a live album, which we'll get in a bit here. Dropped out of the music industry for 3 years.
After this Pour Down Like Silver, apparently they owed Chris Blackwell at Island one more record. And there were some issues that their Sufi chic was not permitting them to do music. Finally, they came to this agreement that they could do music if it was in praise of God. They ended up using the same crew, engineers and musicians, but thematically, there was more of a spiritual aspect to this album.
Yeah, it's pretty pronounced. And as you point out, sonically, it sounds very similar. It's of a piece with the two preceding albums.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have a bit of levity in at least one of the songs, and that is Hard Luck Stories, which sounds like it could have been from either of the two. It's a slight song, just a workaday song about a guy who never has any money, but he never does any work and never does anything, and how everybody's tired of him. A little bit mean-spirited, I would think, a little less sympathetic than Richard's writing on particularly the first album.
It's interesting, you and I talk about Robert Christgau occasionally. Apparently, in 2000, Robert Christgau described this album as semi-miraculous and one of Thompson's 4 knockout albums. So he liked it.
Yeah, I think his original review of it, he only gave it, say, a B+, and he liked it, but I think not. He revises sometimes his record reviews through the years and decades. It's hard to pin down where Chris goes at in any given year, whether he changes opinions or not. It's a great album, period. It's probably the stronger album than, say, Hokey Pokey, I think. But it's more downbeat. It's more inward looking.
Apparently, it's been described by some as somewhat stark in that their original plan was to have Simon Nickel come in and play overdub rhythm guitar on all the tracks, but he wasn't available, so they just ended leaving it like that, very stark. And then Richard was going to overdub rhythm guitar, and he never did.
Huh. It works. It works for the album, I think, thematically and lyrically. Even though sonically it's very similar to the two preceding albums, I think the engineering and production is stronger than Hokey Pokey on this. It works in its favor a bit more. There's a version of the song Beat the Retreat that Richard had remixed for his 1992 box set, 3 CD box set called Watching the Dark. It's wonderful. It's mostly unreleased and alternate takes and live stuff, and not a whole lot of actual album cuts in the early days of CD box set releases. But anyway, he had that track especially remixed for that album, which really brings out, there's a strange instrument, I believe it's Middle Eastern origin, Arabic, and I can't remember the name of it. It's listed in the liner notes. It's a strange sounding instrument. I believe it's a string instrument, maybe like a violin, which really isn't very audible on the original release. And this remix of this one track, Beat the Retreat, it brings it out much more, and it's much brighter sounding. All 3 of these albums, the production, it tends to be very muddied and murky, very dry sounding and bass heavy, and
Yeah, Beat the Retreat has got an Appalachian dulcimer, which is played by Richard Thompson, which is similar to a zither. That's probably what you're thinking of.
No, but there's another instrument on it as well. Because Richard, he plays dulcimer on, a lot through his career.
Yeah.
That's a big instrument with him, the dulcimer. Isn't there another instrument with an odd...
There's also a shakuhachi Japanese flute on there.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Could be.
And it doesn't show up. It's not very prominent on the album proper. It's just that one track was remixed in the early 90s for that compilation. Mm-hmm. And it's not super prominent, but it adds because it's such a meditative and slow, inward-looking song. So it's mostly atmospheric. It's, I don't know, like an Eno thing or something. The Streets of Paradise is... that starts the album out, and that could have been from either of the two preceding albums, and it seems to be an indictment of the contemporary mores of the time. An island of cocaine in a sea of turpentine. I'm not sure what the sea of turpentine is, if that's supposed to reference alcohol. It's certainly uglier and more distasteful and dangerous than alcohol would be. But lyrically, it seems to be at odds with contemporary hedonistic practices.
That makes sense.
John Kirkpatrick, a great accordionist and concertina player, who would play for many years in various iterations of Rich's bands. And it's very prominent on this album and on that song. And if you don't like accordion or concertina, you probably won't like this album very much. It's pretty... playing's pretty pronounced. The second song, I think, is one of Rich's greatest songs, For Shame of Doing Wrong. And to me, that is just, I don't know where I can see where it would fit into the spiritual sort of trip that he was on at the time, and apparently it still is to this day. But it's certainly a very secular and humanistic theme, and with just a beautiful chord progression, and very simple but very evocative guitar, very slow, slower than mid-tempo, rhythmic. That's a wonderful song, For Shame of Doing Wrong, and Linda sings that, the lead vocals on that. Yeah, there's a couple songs, Poor Boys Taken Away, to me is just, that could have been from, I don't know, that to me sounds like it might even be a cover or a traditional song. Night Comes In, that goes on forever. I talk about deeply meditative and atmospheric as the engineering production on these records could get. So quite an excursion, 7 minutes long.
A couple additional notes on Night Comes In. That is a recounting of his formal initiation into the Sufi faith, and it's also noted for its electric guitar playing, especially in the closing, the multi-track solo.
Yeah, live, his guitar parts would really transcend that the studio recording. And the lines, the refrain, dancing till my feet don't touch the ground, it's just a fabulous image.
You can imagine the Sufi dancers.
You can imagine anybody dancing, Gnostic Christians or Hindus or just plain anybody, atheists, agnostics, just humanists. But it is a very slow song. This is not James Brown, the Famous Flames, or the JBs. It's not the Stones.
Yeah.
So it's a very immersive, contemplative track. It's just amazing how such a small band, I mean, his Confederate, were so attuned with each other that they could play so slowly and sparsely with and no great guitar freakouts, which Richard would do live, but how they could achieve with no special studio effects or anything of that nature.
Yeah, that's not one nice advantage of playing with people you've played for years, that you can do more with less, because it's about the interplay of the different musicians, right?
Oh, sure. People were making great records. The latest technology was producing some shocking, avant-garde new sounds, even in the pop music realm.
For sure.
You know, might sound quaint or outdated by today's standards, but he wasn't using any of them. It just focuses the sound, the song, the theme,
and the playing, yeah.
And the playing, sparse and minimalist as the playing is. And live, that'll be a different story. Everybody would get their parts live. Sure. Accordion solos, guitar solos. I don't think any drum solos, but yeah. Now, the next song, Jet Plane in a Rocking Chair.
Yeah.
That's a weird song. That is a stone cold favorite of mine. And that is an odd song. Under 3 minutes long. The metaphor he's using there. Maybe that's an outtake. Maybe that's an earlier song. It sounds purely humanistic. Just it's poetic. It's metaphorical. It's elusive. The guy really is a genius with words. I'd put him up there with our man Bobby Zimmerman from Hibbing, Minnesota. Yep. Yeah, I think he's as good a wordsmith in his fashion as Dylan. Mm-hmm. And I think a song like Jet Plane in a Rocking Chair, it doesn't have to be Subterranean Homesick Blues, a million words, or Girl from the North Country or whatever. It's just very evocative and sweet and funny. Mm-hmm. And the sweetness of, I'll change this heart of mine after these odd, metaphorical, very short verses. I'll change this heart of mine this time. Yeah, maybe that was written during his sort of spiritual awakening. Just one guitar track, no overdubbing. That's another thing that should be noted, I think, with these records. I don't think there was any overdubbing on any of these records. It seems like they were all recorded, not necessarily the first take, but all in one take.
Yeah.
And then you have V3 Retreat, we've discussed that. Mm-hmm. Hard Luck Stories just seems like another street corner, work-a-day song that could have been on Hokey Pokey. Up-tempo and jolly sounding. It's about an irritating person who's really lazy and never has any money. That's A Dimming of the Day and Darji, which is an instrumental. It's two songs merging into one. And that's just acoustic with Richard and Linda duetting Dimming of the Day. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful love song. And Darji, it just follows it. And that's just an instrumental piece, which actually has an interesting backstory. And it was written by a piper, I believe, with the 42nd Regiment of Foot, the Black Watch, Scottish regiment of the British Army, which still exists to this day. That was in Afghanistan, I believe, one of Britain's many 19th century Afghan wars. And the heights of Darji. Darji was apparently a mountain or a region nobody's ever, no outside military powers ever conquered or put much of a dent in Afghanistan. But apparently it was written by a piper who was wounded at the time, and the British troops were in retreat or demoralized, and he sat and composed the song on his bagpipes and played it, and then survived the war and came home, copyrighted it, and it became a thing. And so Richard plays that on guitar, just a single guitar. And it's based on actually something that was written, supposedly, this is all mythical, but not that long ago, 19th century, 1870s, written by a Scottish soldier in the British Army.
James Scott Skinner.
Okay, is that our man?
That's our man.
Okay, all right. There's a track It was on one of their 5 albums for the Fairport Convention, on the live album for, I think, 70 or 71 at the Troubadour in L.A., and they released a great live album. Their last album was called Full House, and this is called House Full. They played a 4-night stand there and released an album of it. And it's called The Battle of the Somme. Of course, one of the bloodiest days in human history, July 1st, 1916. 20,000 British soldiers were killed outright in the first 24 hours. 60,000 ultimately died within the next couple of days. And of course, when it was World War I, there was no end to it until it really ended. Even then, it didn't really end. 20 years later, it started up again. And that's a very simplistic piece. That's a full band playing it. It's mostly just violin and guitar, as Fairport plays it. But Richard has a history of adapting strange, very little known sort of folk songs, but more recent, within maybe 100 years or less, by often unknown or unsung soldiers composing songs. A reoccurring theme in Richard's canon and oeuvre. The man knows his military history, particularly the history of the British Army. But anyway, that's the final song, Yarji and Dimming of the Day.
It should be added, Dimming of the Day is one of his better songs for sure, and it became a staple in his solo live sets.
Yeah, at the time it did. I don't know that I'm not as well versed as, serious hardcore Richard Thompson fanatics are, but if he played that through his career, I know he did it on the tour at the time, and there's a great album that's really coming up next in our chronology, a live album that he and Linda did recorded in 75, where they would regularly play Dimming of the Day. And the one that was re-released with the 2004 Island Record re-release remaster campaign. It's from one show, I think maybe Leeds University, but some of the other bonus tracks from these 3 albums we've been discussing are actually from different shows. They are more or less identical sounding, but they're actually different takes from different shows, which is good VFM, as the kids used to say, value for money. But yeah, Dimming of the Day was a regular thing. It seems to me that he has been very selective about, in his recent years, decades, about what he plays from that particular time in the 70s with Linda. It's not like he plays all his hits. He's not the Stones. He didn't have any hits. But Dimming of the Day it's a very moving song. It's very quiet, very gentle.
Yeah, now this live album, I haven't heard it. I guess it was recorded in November 1975, released by Island Records in 2007. It was their second tour as headliners, where they went through the UK. Anything you want to say about the album?
Get it and dig it. It's unlike those 3 records. The sound is really bright, really vibrant, very live. It's one of the best sounding live albums you'll ever hear. A very small band. He has the great Dave Maddox on drums, Fairport's second drummer, after Martin Brownell died in a horrible auto accident that killed Richard's girlfriend at the time in 1968. And Dave Pegg, who is also Fairport's second bass player. And only that and John Kirkpatrick on concertina and accordion. And if you don't like concertina or accordion, you won't like the record. It's all over it, and it's just Richard. No Simon Nicole on guitar, it's just Richard and Linda. So it's a very small 5-piece band. But the sound is wonderful. It's very live sounding, very, very bright too. But it's great. And there's some breakdowns, straight instrumental breakdowns that recall Fairport, which, like, how do these guys play this stuff? How do they know when to change? It actually used to irritate me. It's like they're so sharp and so precise. It's like avant-garde. It's like Prague music at the time. And, you know, these are like serious hardcore musos. Chord changes, and they always, not always, but sometimes it would annoy me. It's, wow, why do they change? Why are they doing these crazy changes? Show off, you know, what great musicians they are.
Yeah.
But Fairport could rock hard sometimes. This record is not quite as expansive as Fairport. The band is smaller, for one thing. You don't have Dave Swarbrick's violin or Simon Nicole holding down the rhythm guitar. It's a wonderful album. It's primarily taken from the first three albums that we've just been discussing. Nothing, I don't think, from, I'm looking at the track list, nothing from Henry the Human Fly. Several covers, Hank Williams and Buck Owens. And oftentimes, these live versions actually sound better. So Jet playing in a rocking chair actually sounds better than the album version. It's just like extra murky sounding for some reason on an already murky sounding record. It's just that particular track on Pour Down Like Silver. Wonderful record. It's just called The Concert, November 1975. A stupid title, The Concert.
In concert.
Is it in concert? You're right, it is in concert. Oh, good. I thought for years it was The Concert.
In concert, yeah, it's still pretty basic. He also, if you look at the cover for Far Away, Richard looks like some little bobblehead with a floating in space next to Linda with a guitar. It's very strange.
Yeah, exactly. But that would be their final output for another 3 years.
The other thing I just want to mention about the cover to Pour Down Like Silver is the cover of Richard on the front almost makes him look like one of Jesus' followers or something, someone from biblical times.
It does. I don't like that cover.
Yeah.
I don't like. Linda looks better on the back cover.
Yeah, it's a similar type of style on the back, right?
But I don't like that cover. It almost looks, and I'm sure it's not, it almost looks, somehow Richard looks not just posed, but almost he's been made up with extravagant makeup, but he has this sort of beatific look, almost like, you're right, like a Christian biblical character.
Right, which doesn't really give you a feel for the music inside.
No, it doesn't. It's almost a false,
right?
Not
That's right.
False, but a misleading impression. I really don't like that cover at all.
Yeah, you look at that cover, you're like, oh, I'm going to get some traditional Sufi music on here or something.
You're right, but just in general, he looks so not sincere, but so beatific, as though he's having a vision, or he's just enraptured with his own spirituality, or his own belly button, or something like that. I don't know. It rubs me the wrong way. Yeah, that's what they were doing. There's no wonder the record didn't sell. None of them sold, really.
Yeah. Apparently, Richard did some session work during this time. Short tour in '77. Where they were doing largely religious material.
I didn't really.
And another interesting thing I found fascinating is the musicians hired for this album were session players who had been working in the studio with George Harrison and John Cale. So according to Boyd, the three Americans were hugely impressed by Thompson's playing and expressed a wish to work with him. And these guys love Richard.
Wait a minute, are you talking about Pour Down Like Silver? Or?
Oh, no, I'm moving on to First Light in 1978.
Oh, okay. My bad. Yeah, okay. No, the Willie Weeks and Andy Newmark did not play with John Cale.
No, sorry, yeah. This is Neil Larson, Willie Weeks, and Andy Newmark, who had been working in the studio with George Harrison.
I first became aware of them, Andy Newmark and Willie Weeks, from playing on Ronnie Wood's first two albums.
Yeah, just to put this in the context of what they were doing at the time when they got the call to go over and play on this album.
I don't know if Ron Wood, got hip to them by George Beadle or the other way around.
Yeah, I know Willie Weeks was part of George Harrison's orbit for a large part of his solo career, and George and Ronnie were good buddies.
George actually, he plays on one track on one of his songs, Far East Man.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's Willie Weeks. He'd been playing with Aretha Franklin in her touring band, right? But anyway, the story goes is that he went in to Woody's house where he had his recording studio and recorded most of his first two albums, and the Stones, It's Only Rock and Roll, basic track. And to get to the main room, he had to go through the kitchen, and George was sitting having a cup of tea at the kitchen table.
Yeah.
He said hi, and he went in and met Woody and the other guys, and he said, "Yo, man, there's a Beatle sitting at your kitchen table?" Yeah. He was a little bit starstruck, as one might be. But anyway, that's where I first discovered Willie Weeks and Andy Newmark. Andy Newmark played with Sly and the Family Stones, a later iteration. I think on maybe their last album, There's a Riot Going On, I think.
He played with David Bowie?
They both played on Bowie's Young American album. They were a big in-demand rhythm section, but they were well-versed in R&B and funk, which was really coming to the fore in American and British music, particularly American music, and guys like Bowie and Ronnie Wood had their ears to the ground. They were all about American music, current thing, right, as the Stones in general were. So how they ended up working with Richard and Linda Thompson, they were fine players in a fine rhythm section with a distinctive sound. To me, it didn't work.
It didn't necessarily translate into a great album, did it?
Well, no. Richard has said he doesn't like it. I think it's long out of print. It was the last, I think, release was on the Ryko Records, the early 90s. Had obtained a lot of people's catalogs, Bowie, Elvis Costello, various members of the church, and released great versions with bonus tracks of those artists' catalogs. I think Frank Zappa was another one they got. They were a big deal in the early 90s Ryko disc. And they got some of Richard's catalog from Hannibal Carthage Records, and that was one of them. That's, I believe, the last pressing on CD. I had it on vinyl and cassette for the early 90s when I got into Richard. There's not a lot on there. It's some great songs and great playing. My favorite song is a song that probably nobody else would like. It's the second to the last song, House of Cards.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very slow song. It's very noisy. And with masked backing vocals with Linda and maybe not the Watersons, but the McGargle sisters maybe on backing vocals on it. And it's got the drone going on. And it's my favorite song on the record. Pavan is a very intricate, it's a very quiet song that Linda sings, and it's about a female assassin, apparently based on a real person.
Apparently that was the one song that was written on this album by both Richard and Linda.
Oh, really? Linda worked on that too, really?
Yeah. And then The Choice Wife, apparently it was a traditional arranged by Richard Thompson.
Yeah, that just blends into the van. That's just an acoustic guitar thingy. Layla, which not to be confused with one of the few Eric Clapton songs I actually like, it's got the funk aspect. It's got a funky rhythm, and Richard does some funky rhythm guitar on it, and some nice guitar lead figures. Mm-hmm. And that's got a nice mid-tempo R&B feel to it. It's not particularly indicative of Richard, but that's fine because the man can do what he wants. But it works. So let's see, Strange Affair. I think Richard and Linda did that for a couple of years up until the divorce. The tour for Shoot Out the Lights, where they're actively breaking up on the stage. She'd sing that. Guide for Love is a cool song. That's got a traditional death ballad, Irish or British Isles death ballad theme to it. Nice accordion. I don't know who plays the accordion, if it's John Kirkpatrick or not. Don't Let a Thief Steal Into Your Heart is another one that has a nice, breezy, mid-70s funky R&B, maybe a couple years too late, like 2 years too late. And that's a straight duet between Richard and Linda. They both just sing unison harmonies on that.
Maybe we should transition to Sunny Vista.
Yeah.
This came out in 1979, and a lot of interesting explorations into funk and pop and new wave and traditional stuff. And the first time I listened to this, it was on a not high quality recording on YouTube and not a very good speaker. And then I listened to it again on a better system, a better recording, and it made all the difference. I was really digging it. He even tries his hand at Cajun music, some funk on Justice in the Streets.
Yeah.
What do you think? Think of this album.
I agree with those 2 points. They're mighty, they're very danceable.
Yeah.
They're very sing-alongable. The Cajun one, Saturday's Rolling Around, Linda sings that. It's a duet. Just very jolly. And again, this is John Wood producing. There's more people playing on it, more musicians.
The exploration into funk reminds me a little bit like the Clash on Sandinista, just exploring new sonic worlds.
Justice in the Street, to me, is an interesting song. Yeah, I got the record, and actually, this is the second album I bought after I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. I lied earlier. I said, no, I didn't buy another Richard Thompson album until the early 90s. No, that's not true. Yeah. I bought an import copy of this in 84, 85. This is the second one. God, time is ducky, man. Justice in the Streets is the one that got me, and that's the only one Dave Maddox plays drums on. And I don't know what to think about it these days. At the time, it struck me, you played that sucker loud, and that's something that's it's a pretty compelling track.
Yeah, it's cool. Cool sounding loud.
2 guitars, bass, and drums. Simon Nicole is equally as strong as Richard's guitar on that one. Usually he's down mixed a lot. Lyrically, it's like graffiti on the wall. Almost that kind of doggerel. And Richard Thompson, or not Richard, Robert Christgau's review of the album, I give it a fairly good review, B+, I think, worried that his last sentence of the review is that, is this song making reference to the embassy takeover? And I didn't really think about it at the time when I bought the record. To me, it seemed like something the Clash should do. Very intelligent but doggerel, very vague lyrics that could apply to any culture at any time, any place, but not very specific. Richard and Linda both singing. And it's not a record. I don't think Richard's ever really played any stuff since that time. I know he played Living on Borrowed Time as far as the 1982 Shoot Out the Lights tour. Very explosive versions of that, which massive guitar freakouts, extended freakout. So it does have a hard rocking sound to it. But along with that, some very poignant, and I think disguised religious mid-tempo ballads from Linda, which are all very uniformly very good. The 3 ballads would be Why Do You Turn Your Back, Lonely Hearts, which has Kate and Anna McGargle singing harmony on it, and Lonely Hearts. Oh, no, it's Sisters.
Yes, Sisters has got background by the McGarrigles. And
so I think it's a very well recorded and executed album, and not quite as murky and minimalist and muddy as their previous albums with the big 3 from the 70s. Saturday Rolling Around, as you got the Cajun feel. You're going to Need Somebody. I think that's another religious devotional song. It rocks very well, a very simplistic and vague lyric that could be applied in humanistic terms to a lover, friendship, or God, or a spiritual entity, higher power, if you will, but rocks very well. Why You Turn Me Back? Sunny Vista, the title song, is a funny, pokey song with a just acidic, biting lyric. It could be a Clash lyric, or maybe a Sex Pistols lyric. Just a commentary on contemporary, as of 1979, the way of the world, the modern world. Borrowed Time. That's a pretty ferocious rocker with, again, a very vague lyric that could apply to a rebel rock, if you will, lyric that could apply to many places, in many situations, in many historical periods or epics. And the re-released version, the CD version, has a re-recording of Georgiana Spree, which is a track from the Hokey Pokey album, which doesn't really do much. It's just a different, they just re-recorded for some reason. And it's a nice, funny little song. And so, that's my take on that album. It's a strong album.
Yeah.
And it has some good flavors, different flavors on it.
Yeah, it stands out to me in that it's the one album out of all of these where he definitely seems like he's putting his head up around the parapet and taking musical things in the zeitgeist, and using them, the ones that interest him.
Oh, definitely. Now, you mentioned the Clash, the Sandinista album. I think that's a perfect example. And Richard was a fan of the Clash, and this is probably maybe his, who knows, I don't know the guy, but this might have been his starting point, because the Clash were recording or had just finished the London Calling album with all its different flavors and approaches and topics, and that's right around the time they were recording this. And so I definitely agree with that, and I don't think it's a well-known or even well-loved album in his repertoire, but I think it's a very accessible album.
A lot of fun. I like this one.
Richard is getting out of that sort of four-square British folk, if you will, folk rock feel that he had previously with his albums with Linda. And he's allowing a little bit of funk, a little bit of up-tempo, real rock and roll to inform a lot of the rhythms and arrangements. And I think that's nothing but good, and it's only going to get better through his career.
Should we use that as a transition to Shoot Out the Lights?
Yeah.
Now, looking at the credits for Shoot Out the Lights, the one thing that's interesting is the producer has shifted from John Wood to Joe Boyd actually producing this record. And this is my entry point to Richard Thompson. And wow, such a powerful record. Every song is great. The playing just cuts like a knife. The lyrical content, Wall of Death, Shoot Out the Lights, it just cuts you to the quick. It's so precise, lyrically and musically, all of these songs.
Sonically, it's very bright. It's much brighter than John Wood's production and whoever was doing the engineering on those records. And there's also something very immediate, not slovenly, but loose about it, which is not a term, not a feel that you would previously get from Richard Thompson.
Yeah, I'm just looking at how they arranged the songs, and there's some real slow, kind of dark songs, but great. But then you've got like Man in Need, Backstreet Slide, Wall of Death, which are all like upbeat in terms of their musicality.
Yeah. It helps having Rich has always had great players and still does to this day, but Dave Maddox back on drums. Yeah, in his book, Rich's autobiography, These Women, How I Lost My Way and Found My Voice, he describes the band decided to carry on after the horrible auto accident that claimed their drummer and Rich's girlfriend's life. And auditioning people, they got around to Dave Maddox, who is a jazz drummer. Mm-hmm. And we think of, say, Charlie Watts. I don't know what kind of, if he's big band jazz or small. All jazz is as vast a term, rock and roll or any other genre you might want to name. But apparently Maddox came in and for the audition he said, yeah, I don't know what you're on about. I like it. Yeah, I'll do it. And he's a beast of a drummer.
Yeah.
He's nothing like rock. Charlie Watts, a very different drummer. Apparently he's a jazz drummer, and he didn't understand the folk and traditional leanings that Richard had, the rest of Fairport was going for. He continued to play with Richard all through his career. And sonically, it's just a great sound. It's a bright sound. It's a little light on the bass. I believe it's not Dave Pegg on bass. It's Pete Zorn, the bassist on this album, who to this day plays with Richard. He's a multi-instrumentalist.
Yeah.
And wonderful singer, wonderful sax player. He's an expat American. Yeah, I moved to Britain.
It's actually, looking at the credits, it's actually half and half, Dave Pegg and Pete Zorn.
Oh, Pegg does play on this. Oh, okay.
Yep.
And I think nobody really knew when it was first released that there was a marital strife going on. Rhino Records released a version a couple of years ago, just a very super limited run. I finally got a used copy on the internet with a second disc. And basically it's the main album's remastered, but the second disc has from live shows on their U.S. tour. And apparently they get pretty emotional on stage, up to the point of Linda hitting Richard over the head with a bottle and breaking it, and Richard bleeding all over his face while he played a solo at one gig. So there was a lot of tension on stage. And Linda was pregnant and was also losing her voice. Had some medical condition where your stage fright physically causes you to be unable to sing, and I think she suffers from that now to this day. I know she has a new album out with, I think you've told me.
Yeah, where she doesn't sing on it, so maybe that vocal condition started around that time. Yeah,
I think so. And yeah, I think Linda Ronstadt has the same condition. She literally lost her voice, can't sing due to some neurological, something like that. But I want to say, and there's a brightness to this album which makes it sit up and notice, is that one of Richard, in my estimation, it's not one of Richard Thompson's greatest albums. There's the songs that I listen to this day regularly, and there are numerous live versions of it. Wall of Death is the best song on the album. There's no guitar freak out. Even live, he's never done a guitar freak out. He basically plays Mike Bloomfield's guitar figure from Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone. It's a wonderful song, wonderful lyric. Everything about it, the arrangement is just note perfect. Other than that, Shoot Out the Lights. Great mood, great atmosphere, great guitar freak out. If you like the guitar freak out, listen to 42 live versions where the guitar freak out is even more inventive and more expressive. Other than that, there's Linda's songs. Walking on a Wire is very moving. Just the Motion is very moving. Did She Jump or Was She Pushed? Very moving. Songs that Richard still plays to this day in his live sets. I haven't seen him live yet. I will very shortly in a couple months with you, my friend. But Don't Renege on Our Love, Man in Need, these are just very average songs, I think. Backstreet Slide is another one. They sound great. I just don't think, as far as the songs go, there's one one and a half that has songs that I like to listen to regularly. The original album was supposed to be recorded the previous year, in 1980, by Jerry Rafferty.
And it was recorded.
Was the whole thing recorded?
I don't know if the whole thing was recorded, but I know that they couldn't get it released, and that's when he ended up doing Strict Tempo.
Oh, okay. And that's just Richard. That's a solo vanity project. Instrumental. Came out in 81. I only know 3 songs from the Jerry Rafferty sessions, the aborted sessions for Shoot Out the Lights, and they were released on the 3 CD box set, Watching the Dark.
It says, just reading about the album, it says the album was completed, but Rafferty could not interest any record companies and lost in the region of £30,000 on the project. Copies of the tapes on the Rafferty-sponsored sessions have subsequently become available as a bootleg under the titles Rafferty's Folly and Before Joe Could Pull the Trigger.
It's a re-recording of the 1975 song from Pour Down Like Silver of For Shame of Doing Wrong.
Yeah.
And I think Richard had it remixed for the box set. And there's only 2 other songs that both appear on the album proper, Shoot Out the Lights. But For Shame of Doing Wrong, it's an old song they re-recorded. And to me, it blows the original out of the water and is actually, other than Wall of Death, better than anything on the album itself, including the title song, Shoot Out the Lights, with its wonderful searing guitar and its really miserable lyrical theme, and the musical theme. Yeah, I've looked at the credits for it, and on the Jerry Rafferty session, I didn't recognize any of the players. The drummer, I think, is wonderful. It's a wonderful drum performance on For Shame of Doing Wrong. Some guy with a Scottish name. Never heard of him before. And it's more together sounding than the album, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but it could have been all over the charts, even in the United States, I think. It's up-tempo, it's danceable, it's very catchy, unlike the original version. I'm talking about For Shame of Doing Wrong from the Jerry Rafferty aborted sessions. So what they did wrong, what was wrong with that session, I don't know.
Apparently, Jerry Rafferty, there was tension in the project because Richard Thompson would show up for the mixing and Rafferty would just ignore him. And he just got totally fed up with working with Rafferty. He had this perfectionist approach, and Thompson wanted a more spontaneous approach.
They certainly got that with the album proper, Shoot Out the Lights. It does have it is not slick. Even though the sound, the mix is very bright, it sounds, again, no overdubs, maybe the vocals were, but there's almost a looseness to it, and loose is not an adjective I would ever really apply to Richard Thompson.
Yeah, it's very bright, but it's got that spontaneous feel, almost like guys in a room playing together. There's a real darkness on this album, unlike Don't Renege on Our Love, Shoot Out the Lights, Wall of Death. Even when the music is more upbeat, like a lot of the best music, you've got this dark undercurrent mixed with maybe the music's doing something as a counterpoint to it.
I understand that. I agree with that. That's actually kind of the popular wisdom as well about the album. I can't dispute it. I'm just saying, for my taste, the songs, and this includes the wonderful lyrics, wonderful band playing, wonderful guitar playing, wonderful engineering, wonderful production, wonderful mixing. What could be wrong? It's just that the majority of the songs for me, the Linda songs are the strongest, and they tend to be the slower ones. And so it's really Wall of Death, which is a mid-tempo song. It's basically a take on Like a Rolling Stone musically. Richard, it was so much better. He would become so much better at writing songs about girls, songs about being aggrieved at women. And of course, they become less personal and more character studies, like Springsteen's character studies. But he'd become a much more interesting lyricist. Some of the lyric writing on Don't Read Naked on Love, Man in Need, just, to me, it's not interesting. Backstreet Slide is interesting. It's got a lot of that sort of Fairport chord changes and rhythmic changes, which sometimes I think are unnecessary. The next album, Richard's first proper solo album after Henry the Human Fly, I think song for song and musically and mix-wise, it sounds almost exactly identical. A little bit tighter, but musically, sonically, very similar to Shoot Out the Lights. I think song for song is a far superior album.
Which album?
The next album that Richard would release, his first proper solo album without Linda,
Hand of Kindness.
Hand of Kindness.
Yeah. Just a few comments on what you're saying here. I personally really like this record. This is my favorite of the ones we've discussed so far. I view it as just an apotheosis of everything he was striving to do at this point. To your point, and again, it's such a subjective thing. We don't have spreadsheets and numbers we can refer to who is right and who is wrong, and that's great. That's part of the fun thing about music. To your point, Richard Thompson himself has dismissed the albums he did with Linda as he's not that happy with them because he wasn't as sharp in his songwriting, and he didn't give them the care that he would give to a lot of the work that he would pursue in his solo albums.
Does that include Is It Up the Lights?
I would assume
his
so.
Autobiography it doesn't go up that far. It only goes up to, I think, Pour Down Like Silver.
Yeah, he didn't say that in his I don't know what he said in his autobiography. It was just one of the quotes I read on the Wikipedia entry for one of these albums we've been discussing.
A lot of artists do that. They're unhappy in retrospect with the final outcome or the way it was presented. If it's music, the way it was mixed, engineered, maybe some band members playing on it, their own playing, their own singing. That's very common to hear.
Here's the quote. It says, "In later years, Thompson expressed dissatisfaction with his recorded output in the late 1970s. The regrets I would have would be career stuff. I was too flaccid in the 1970s. I just wasn't thinking tightly enough to make a difference, especially the later 70s, where I made really indifferent records. I just didn't have my mind on the job."
I wonder if he's referring to First Light and Sunny Vista.
And it could be. And the reference here is to the Patrick Humphreys biography, Richard Thompson, the biography, which came out in 1997.
I haven't read that. I read his Tom Waits biography, Side of the Road, I think. I'm pretty sure it was Humphreys. That doesn't surprise me, especially a guy of Thompson's stature, ever evolving. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Is he including Shoot Out the Lights in that? Clearly that's 82, he was recorded in 81, but so that's not late 70s.
Right. So as a general point, I think as a songwriter and in many different ways, he sharpened his art as he went through his career.
Yeah, it is a very sharp detour. If nothing else, sonically, it's a very immediate sounding record. More so than any other record that he did, including Fairport albums.
That's right. It is a very immediate sounding record.
I'll ask you this. So that was your entry point. That was your entry point was Shoot Out the Lights. My entry point was I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. That remains, and they're both albums with Linda, first and last with Linda. That remains my personal touchstone. I can't say it's my absolute favorite, but it's up there. It's up there in top 5, top 3 maybe. How much does nostalgia, and maybe this is a wide range of question, but how much does nostalgia or first impressions, you think, does that play into long-lasting appreciation?
Yeah, I'm sure it does. And I have a vague memory. We were talking earlier about where I first found out about it. I have vague memories of seeing the vinyl of Shoot Out the Lights at Northern Lights when it was that little hole in the wall.
Yeah, that's where I bought my copy of Bright Lights, by the way, along with Astral Week.
And I think they may have been playing it in the store, too. I have some vague memory, but I bought that album, so I'm sure that has something to do with it. I know all those songs on Shoot Out the Lights so well.
Yeah, that's probably mirrors my experience with I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. After a couple of years, I got into, I have this kind of neurotic music collection system, but when I get into somebody, I'd really get into them and I'd blow all my money on their catalog. One day, if I could find all their catalog, going to sometimes multiple record stores. Anyway, I did that with Richard Thompson's catalog in the early 90s. Roadrunner Records. I don't know if it's still there. 45th and Nicollet. That's where I bought a whole lot of the stuff on vinyl and cassette. I didn't have a CD player. I swore I'd never get a CD player and blah, blah, blah. But other than that, it was, I think, as I've said, it was 84 and probably 85 that I bought I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, and then Sunny Vista. So for several years, those were the only Richard Thompson-related albums that I had and knew. When I got, and I knew the reputation of Shoot Out the Lights. I knew it from the reputation from reading about it and whatnot. So when I got it, I know this sounds horrible, but I was a little underwhelmed.
Yeah.
I was expecting, now the sound of it really got me, especially when I started doing the solos, like on the big solo songs, like the title track, and just the overall sonically, that piercing power sound that he had. That got me. I don't know if this has ever happened to you before, but sometimes getting into a new artist, this has happened to me with books, with authors as well, getting really geeked on somebody and like getting everything they have and reading a whole bunch of it all at the same time, or musically, listening to a whole bunch of it all at the same time. It blurs and lessens the impact. It's a bad idea. I don't do it and I don't like it anymore, but I used to be very guilty of that. It dulls the impact of an individual album, of an individual song. And I was very guilty of that for many years when I had the money to do that.
Like you have this giant buffet and you're trying to cram it all down your throat in an hour or something, and you miss the nuances of each dish.
Exactly. Right? Very well put. That's exactly what it would feel like. And I don't do that anymore, and I actively know why. I thought it was
me too.
Very unhealthy. But I think maybe that might have happened with Shoot Out the Lights, is that I got into it along with 9 other albums. You have to take that with a 50-pound bag of salt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I see the context that you're coming at it from.
Yeah.
It's like when someone has an opinion, I don't disagree with you having that opinion. It's just interesting to find out why people have different opinions, and you explain that. So that's actually really interesting.
Oh, sure, yeah. One little tidbit, I guess we've come to the end of our journey with Linda, but Strict Tempo, which came out, and it was pretty unlooked, but I bought it in that fever, early 90s fever. That was one of the records. It's actually on vinyl.
I did too, actually. I bought that in the 80s.
Oh, so you had it before I did.
Yeah,
okay.
I listened to it a lot.
And it's been re-released, just so you know, on CD. On a boutique label, it's the actual packaging is not CD size. It's the size of a postcard. And it's shaped like a postcard. It's rectangular like that.
Oh, okay.
And what's the label? Richard actually has liner notes on it for each song. I can't remember if he did on the original or not, but it seems like he might have written it for this reissue. What label was it? Omnivore Records. Omnivore Records released The Waitress's entire catalog on 2 CDs with the extended mixes. That's one of my favorite bands of all time. Omnivore. Okay, that makes sense.
Let's just talk about, just for a minute, Strict Tempo. It came out in 81. Between Sunny Vista and Shoot Out the Lights, Richard, to generate some income because the thing with Jerry Rafferty fell through, formed his own record label, Elixir Records, and recorded this album at a small studio in London, playing all the instruments himself except for the drums, and it's all instrumental stuff, a lot of them traditional songs and arranged by Richard.
It's very fun. I sometimes use it when I'm feeling frisky for Tai Chi workout music.
Yeah, there you go.
And so he gives a little explanation for every song. Oddly enough, one of the most American R&B rockin' songs on it is Rockin' in Rhythm, which I believe is the first song on side 2. It's a Duke Ellington song, and it's got banjo, which is a very prominent instrument in jazz for many decades. I've never heard it. God help us. You want to talk about Duke Ellington and his 50 years of... I just heard on KBEM, just literally 3-4 days ago, and this sounds familiar, but it was Ella was scatting over it. Because the rhythm, the melodies, I know this from somewhere, but I can't possibly. And then the DJ, Sean McPherson, comes out and says, that was Rockin' in Rhythm by Duke Ellington Orchestra from 1958 or whatever it was, with guest star Ella Fitzgerald over it. And I'd never heard that. I'm sure there's probably multiple versions because Duke Ellington recorded it so long.
Yeah. All right, dude. I think have we tied a bow on Richard Thompson for this era?
I do believe so. There's more to come should we decide to accept that mission.
Thanks for joining us today on the Culture Drop podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion about the music of Richard Thompson, with a spotlight on his musical output from 1972 to 1982, including several albums he did with his wife at the time, Linda Thompson. We'll be back again soon. Hope to see you next time.